chapter 15, beginning in verse 11. And Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that belongs to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with what the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get myself up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your servant, your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to him, Quickly, bring a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is now alive. He was lost and is now found. And they began to celebrate. The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Now, I'd really like to share my latest dad joke with you this morning, but I decided to tell you a dad story instead. When my dad was in high school, he went to his father, who was a railroad engineer. And please excuse my language. I'll make it as clean as I can. But anyway, he said to his father, Dad, I believe God is calling me to become a minister. And his father looked at him in the eye and said, I don't know why the heck you want to do that, but be a damn good one. And as we are in baseball season, with hot dogs and family vacations, and since this is Father's Day, I'd like to share with you a story I heard about a young man who appreciates what it means to be a father. For we know that baseball's been around a long time, because in Genesis 1 it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Anyway, Tim Burke was a major league pitcher for the Montreal Expos, with potentially many years left in his career. But he decided to retire at the age of 33. The question is, why? Tim and his wife, Christine, could not have children. So they adopted 4 Korean children, all with special needs. Tim realized the demands this put on his wife to be mother, father, nurse, contractor, secretary, etc. He decided to give up the game he loved in order to be a major league dad and a major league father. Christine was particularly moved by her husband's decision for a number of reasons. She knew how much he loved baseball and realized through this decision how much he loved God, her, and their children. Christine was especially touched by his dedication to their children because her father had left before she was born. She had never known a father's unconditional love. Her husband's decision, although puzzling to many baseball fans, was to them a clear decision to be there for their family. It stands as an excellent example of good decision making in the midst of a society where family values are declining. Let's turn our attention to another father, the one we heard about in the gospel this morning, whose decision to be there is critical to our understanding of God's intentions for parents. The plight of the prodigal son is a familiar biblical story that has been repeated for generations and generations. The primary message is, of course, that the prodigal came to himself. He realized he was in trouble and he needed to go home. But if you consider what might have happened if to this man, this young man, if his father had not been ready to receive him. Let us concentrate on just one verse here, verse 20. It appears to me in this verse 3 phrases that provide sound wisdom for all of us. The first phrase is, while he was still far off, that is, the prodigal. Reading through this parable many times, I get the distinct feeling that this father, although loving his son enough to let him go, never stopped loving him and never stopped praying for him. You see, he could have said to himself, that unappreciative brat, he took my money and left, I'm over with him. But that's not what he did. Instead, we see a father preparing for his son's return as he waits patiently for the Spirit to turn him around. What do you do when your children are far off? That can range from running away to not living up to your expectation or God's. What would you do? The advice we receive from this parable is to be there. The prodigal's father did not give up. He exercised patience. He was able to wait upon the Lord. That can only happen if we have a close relationship with God. Do you have that kind of relationship where you can trust in God day by day? Tim's close relationship with the Lord enabled him to make what others thought was a crazy decision. In the parable, a pre-established relationship with God enabled this father to wait until his son would come to his senses. Those of you who have been through those moments with youth know it requires great staying power. If you're going through this at the moment, I encourage you to trust God and seek His face daily. Those who may one day be in that position are wise if they establish a spiritual foundation to be ready. And then, beyond his ability to wait, our text tells us the prodigal's father was filled with compassion. His mercy was like the mercy of God. Imagine having your temper or need for retribution so in check, you can only demonstrate mercy and love. Do you realize that one of the reasons why there are so many dysfunctional adults running around today is because they've never heard these words, I love you and I forgive you? It happens because parents abdicate their roles. It happens because parents may never have experienced God's forgiveness themselves. It happens because the models our parents have been given were negative, or worse yet, abusive. Some have suggested this story be called the parable of the prodigal father because of his reckless love for his son. I love that. Consider what you want your children to remember you most for. If you're going to err on the side of love and compassion, it seems to me that is the right way to go. What would Jesus do? Did he spend more time caring and loving his disciples, or more time chastising them? Christ tells us in this parable that included in his Father's forgiveness was a ready response. He put his arms around him and kissed him. Do you think the prodigal knew that he was forgiven? You bet he did. And he knew right at that moment that he was forgiven. Many times parents try to buy the affection of their children when all they need to do is show them some love and affection. Do you think there's any significance in the last thing that Jesus did before he went to the cross was to wash their feet? I think that was his way of hugging them and telling them they were forgiven, and he wanted them to forgive others. Some fathers and mothers say, beyond being seen as merely a provider, I would like to be an effective parent. Let me ask you, how much do you love God? Do you love God enough to let that love fall on your children and grandchildren? Do you love in the manner that Tim Burke loved his children? Do you love with a willingness to give up in order to receive? Do you love like this prodigal father? Thanks be to God.